Number 12 then, Scott McKenna at Aberdeen. Stefan, why has Scott McKenna made it to number 12 in this list?
Well, interestingly enough, I think it's actually quite a good segue off the back of what you were saying with James there about underrated or overrated. And although we made this list a few weeks ago, just yesterday on Twitter, our friends at the Pure Football podcast kind of put this interesting tweet out about, asking fans to name the most overrated and underrated players in the Scottish Premiership. And what really stood out to me was just the sheer amount of people who said Scott McKenna is entirely overrated. And I had a good think about it, and I thought, although I kind of agree to an extent that he has become quite overrated, and it's almost become the butt of every joke in Scottish football this season that he's not worth £6 million or whatever, or Aberdeen are going to ask for 15 next summer and things like that. I do wonder if we're kind of getting to the point where, because that's kind of that wave of kind of jibes and remarks and jokes and things, and it's just the way Scottish, not just Scottish football, but Scottish society as a whole is, that we all kind of rip the piss out of each other. I wonder if that's gone to such an extent that McKenna's now actually quite underrated because, to put it bluntly, everyone thinks he's an overrated piece of crap, and
Wow.
Well, and I'm only saying that because I'm about to defend him, because I actually think he's still undoubtedly a very solid young defender in the Scottish Premiership. People forget, I mean, they might not forget obviously because they don't check these things like we do, I guess, but he's fifth in the Premiership this season for winning defensive duels. And in terms of winning headers as well, he's 67% success rate, which isn't the highest in the league, but it's only 2% off Christopher Ayer. I know he's not the best passer of the ball, and at times he has kind of ran around looking like he's having to put out fires at Aberdeen. But I really think that underneath kind of all the stick from rival fans and all the hyperbole, which I'll be honest, Aberdeen have probably been the biggest culprit of this, by kind of as soon as any club, and this isn't just Scottish football, it's any level, is that as soon as they put a price tag on a player, and as soon as they basically make it higher than he really is worth, to obviously trying to fend off genuine interest, it almost always works in a negative aspect, because then that just kind of hangs over the player, and that's exactly what's happened to Scott McKenna. Because if you look at a timeline of his kind of rise at Aberdeen, as soon as this kind of transfer speculation came along, and as soon as that kind of £6 million price tag was placed on him, he's kind of struggled. And that's not entirely his fault. Aberdeen as a whole have struggled. We kind of mentioned that when we talked about Conor McLennan in a few podcasts back. We'll probably mention it with some other players who maybe come up in the list. And, he's had to play in a defence that really, really, really has struggled for consistency, not just in terms of performances, but in terms of personnel. He's had maybe 3 or 4 different centre-back partners this season and last season. And he's basically had hundreds of things up against him, but in my opinion, on paper, and I still think he's a very solid player, and he might not be worth £6 million, he might not be the saviour of the Scotland national team, but I think in terms of potential, and I think in terms of his current ability as well, he's still one of the best centre-backs in the league, and as such, that's why I've put him on my list.
James, are you going to agree with Stefan, or are you going to be one of the people that calls him a piece of, I'm not going to repeat what Stefan said?
I wouldn't go that far. I think, obviously, he is a good player. He is a good centre-back. Like Stefan says, he wasn't worth the transfer valuation that Aberdeen put on him last summer. I think, as you pointed out, Stefan, that is almost certainly just done to sort of scare clubs off and keep them away. But I mean, this year his defensive dual success rate has increased. His aerial dual success rate has increased compared to last season. One point I think it's worth pointing out for why his defensive dual success rate is so high is probably because he sits fairly deep, because the Aberdeen defensive line sit fairly far back. So in terms of, he doesn't really deal with that many players like running directly at him and then trying to wriggle their way past or whatever. But he's certainly a good player. He definitely is. He deserves to be in the Scotland squad. I think I think if he's fit, he should probably be starting for Scotland as well. I would and we've said this about so many players in this sort of series, but I would like to see him in a different team to see how well he copes, because I think he's very good at, in McKenna's system, where he sits deep, he wins his tackle, he lumps the ball away, and he just does that ad infinitum. But I'd like to see what he does in a team, say a Celtic or a Rangers, where they play a much higher defensive line, where, because he's not the fastest centre back in the world, so you wonder how well he'd cope with playing a wee bit higher up the park. And to be honest, we won't know that until he leaves Aberdeen, because McKenna is very much set in his ways in that kind of thing. So I'd like to see how he'd get on in a different team, and I think if he could, say, adapt his game to perform with a high defensive line, then I think we'd finally see why what the fuss has been about. But while he plays in such a limited role in McInnes's team, I don't think we'll ever see the best of him, and I think there will always be questions asked until he can play with a bit more variety, I guess.
The other kind of point I was going to put to you, Stefan, was obviously the kind of stats you went through, and it kind of backs up what he's good at and what he's done well this season or in subsequent seasons. But it's the other thing that he's so important for an Aberdeen, and it maybe sounds a bit simplistic, but it's the influence he has when he's in the team compared to when he's not in the team. I mean, he's obviously it sounds very, very simple, but he's a hugely influential player for them. Like they miss him when he's not there.
Yeah, he is a huge player for them, and I think, and that's kind of the thing that is probably worth there now. Aberdeen have the third best defensive record in the league this season, and if Andrew Southwick is here, he'd maybe disagree with this, but in my opinion, he's the only good defender at Aberdeen. By and large, at least in terms of who've actually played this season. And I think that maybe, as simplistic as it is, that maybe points out that you're talking about a team that's the third best defensive record in the league, but he's maybe the only player in that team who actually strikes me as one who's a really solid player, who can only get better. I think James makes a really good point about he has to kind of maybe show that he has more to his game going forward. I think one of the reasons people were kind of clamouring for him so well at Scotland was that he kind of offered that kind of physicality that a lot of the kind of more modern centre-backs for Scotland don't really have. We've almost kind of gone back on, I mean, for much of my life growing up, people were arguing that Scottish defenders were kind of too physical and too tall and too blunt. And then we had this kind of wave of more technical, softer centre-backs come through. And it's almost flipped again, where when Scott McKenna showed up, people were like, we finally now got an actual physical centre-back that Gordon Strachan would be happy with. And I can certainly see the appeal of like a future Scotland squad based around maybe McKenna as that kind of physical centre-back alongside like a John Souttar who can kind of pass the ball around. My only issue with the argument that he might have to go and show more of the stuff that he's not good at in our club is, for example, if he moves to a Celtic or a Rangers, is probably odds are that in terms of just the way football works and the way that young Scottish players work, is he's more likely to actually end up at a team in the Championship or maybe the lower half of the Premier League, where he probably will have to be playing about 20 feet in front of his own goal line for 90% of the season, and he will have to basically spend most of his game clattering into huge athletes and beating them in the air. And that's maybe where the appeal is for him. I mean, obviously another thing as well it's worth pointing out is that despite the kind of transfer, the price tag that was put on him, clubs have been making offers for him. And if I'm not mistaken, in the summer transfer window just there, I'm wondering if I'm confusing that with January. Maybe it was January, but there were bids and there was offers, and it came down to the last few days as to whether he was actually going to stay at Aberdeen or move down south to a bigger English club in terms of finances. So it depends how his career works out. James is absolutely right. If he moves to Celtic or Rangers and he has to prove that he can be this kind of complete centre back, he might get found out there. But I think odds are that he's probably going to end up at a Burnley or a Birmingham or maybe not Sunderland if they can get that together. But I don't mean that in a condescending way. I mean he might end up at a more physical league where his attributes actually work quite well. For example, like a Grant Hanley. I mean, Grant Hanley, when he plays for Scotland, a lot of fans wonder what the deal is, but he obviously does a pretty decent job at Norwich because he's managed to find a league that takes those attributes that he has and he can make the most of them. And I think Scott McKenna's maybe in a similar foil to that. And like I said, at the age that he's at, he's got his whole career ahead of him. So whether he continues doing this for Aberdeen and getting abuse from rival fans, or he moves on and kind of gets better, I'm not sure. But for now, I think he's a player who has a solid amount of current ability, and he's proved that in the Premiership, and he's also one who can get better as well.